Continuing You Can Change the World, The Christopher Approach by James Keller. Chapter 2, The Problem Has a Cure. It's not too late for America, or any country for that matter. This is what took place in Germany. But thank God, in the United States, it is not too late to reverse this trend. It is not too late to do something about it. It seems safe to say that less than 1% of the American people are set on the destruction of our country. Well, it's nowhere near that low nowadays. Furthermore, there is little danger of exaggerating in saying that every one of this tiny minority has a militant hatred of the immutable truth on which our nation is founded, that man is a child of God and endowed by his Creator with certain unalienable rights. I guess you could say part of that. I don't think most people in America believe that anybody's a child of God. At least not in the Christian way. But that certain rights shouldn't be infringed? Oh, most certainly. I think even more people than used to. Also, you will invariably find, once you investigate, that practically all of this minority are in key spots where they can pass on their hatred, not to a few, but to the mass of people. This is so because those who have an active hatred of God are missionaries at heart and are never content to keep that hatred to themselves. Well, some just don't believe in certain ideas of God. It's not quite the same as hatred. They strive incessantly to pass it into the bloodstream of our national life, defiling the minds and hearts of everyone they can reach with their foul ideas. Ever on the job, they use every possible medium: education, government, labor, press, radio, movies, comic strips, magazines, books, and countless other channels to further their purpose. They are in a race for man's soul. Their program is well organized, unusually efficient, remarkably aggressive. They mingle with the people. They speak their language. They outsmart all others with their well-thought-out techniques and formulas of approach. Admittedly, it is difficult for many to resist their beguiling invitations and the honeyed promises they offer, but seldom, if ever, fulfill. Acknowledging all this, it is still very simple to correct such a condition. One of the best ways to cure a starving patient is to build him up with good, nourishing food. The best way to cure this disease in our society is to build up society itself with good ideas and ideals, and to eliminate those which are evil. Our responsibility to our fellow men in this respect is tremendous. Christ has put in our hands the divine medicinal power, the restorative power of love. Ours is the mission to bring that love to all mankind, to go to all men and to all nations. There is no substitute, no shortcut. The great truth of the times, wrote David Boone not too long ago in the New York Sun, is that in the terrible light of the atomic bomb, it is clear now, and nothing can save the world, civilization, except acceptance and practice of the brotherhood of man. And the emphasis goes on practice. Few things are accepted more and practiced less. Yeah. A lot of cults talk about love, 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 but their love as a noun is overly repetitive and not clear. And as a verb, it's like, nowhere near to what it claims. Those who have a burning love of God and of man, not merely of self, will go to the greatest lengths to put that brotherhood into practice. They will suffer everything to share that love with all mankind. It is the Christopher thesis, therefore, that for the 1% bent on destruction, it should not be too difficult to find another 1% who will strive with even greater imagination and enterprise to show a devoted and continuing solicitude for our brothers of the 100 million who are reached by no faith. Well, most Americans nowadays aren't Christian. But that doesn't mean they're not reached by faith. I think faith is actually increasing more than just, oh, you've gone to a church. As Christophers, as Christ-bearers, they will go into their very midst, into all the spheres that influence the destinies of mankind. Most of these 100 million are blessed with an abundance of common sense. They are extremely fair when they know the facts, and are seriously interested in getting fair play for all men of all nations. They most certainly are not atheistic. A Gallup poll revealed that 94% of Americans believe in God, 3% list themselves as not knowing, and only another 3% put themselves down as atheists. Their present drift from religion is probably much less their fault than it is that of the followers of Christ, who fail to go and keep going to them with the same determination and thoroughness displayed by Christ's enemies in their relentless drive to enslave the earth. This is a far from normal state of affairs. The strength of American life is rooted in Christian truth. As an editorial in Fortune magazine recently pointed out, the basic teachings of Christianity are in its bloodstream. It said, the central doctrine of its political system, the inviolability of the individual, is a doctrine inherited from 1900 years of Christian insistence upon the immortality of the soul. The first Americans acknowledged this. They believed in the supernatural, as every important document of colonial history shows. From Georgia to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, they had respect and reverence for certain fundamental Christian principles, which modern totalitarians and materialists seek to destroy. Among these truths are the following. The existence of a personal God who has spoken to the world. Jesus Christ, true God and true man. Well, does Jesus ever claim this even in the Bible? The Ten Commandments. The sacred character of the individual. The sanctity of the lifelong marriage bond. Well, yeah, in Catholicism there's no divorce because of, what the New Testament says. But sometimes it's best for divorce, I would say. But the sanctity of the home as the basic unit of the whole human family. The human rights of every person as coming from God, not from the state. The right based on human nature to possess private property with its consequent obligation to society. Due respect for domestic, civil, and religious authority. Judgment after death. Now, okay, you can respect without agreeing, without taking something as authoritative. As much as you can say that God is creator, whatever has been decided upon by the people in charge and the people at the bottom that support that, is, the rights that they have. But certainly each of these are being affronted. But a lot of that is because of unscientific claims in the Bible. You have to address that, which that sort of has built as the years gone by, not just, These basic truths are only a portion of all things which Christ commissioned his church to teach all nations, Matthew 28:19-20. Upon them the early Americans wisely built our nation. Proof that recognition of them was much more than lip service to eternal truths, that they were actually a part of the lives of the men and women who first settled our country, is founded in one account after another of the early days of this country's history. Well, some of the founding fathers weren't Christian. They would attend church, but they didn't take the thing literally, so that's not Christian. And they made a point about Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin are not the only ones. For example, in the field of education alone, 140 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the motto of Harvard University is given as In Christi Gloriam, for the glory of Christ. The university's founder, John Harvard, was referred to as a godly gentleman and a man of learning in the Legislative Act of 1638 that authorized the founding of this world-famed institution. And during this administration of the school's first president, Master Dunster, one of the student directives, was even more explicit in emphasizing the spiritual values that characterize all phases of early American life. Let every student be plainly instructed, the directive reads, and earnestly pressed to consider well the main end of his life and studies is to know God and Jesus Christ, which is eternal life. Christ is the only foundation of all sound knowledge and learning. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Thus, these early Americans set the pace in acknowledging the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, and what was good enough for them should at least represent the minimum good for us. At any rate, their beliefs were good enough for our founding fathers, who, right in the beginning, wrote these words in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, the pursuit of happiness, that's a personal decision. It's not anything that anybody can give or take away your right with. And again, quoting to the same document, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The founding fathers, you will see, were most explicit. They were God-fearing men. For them, the idea of God had to be integrated with everything if men were not to forget that the rights, liberties, and life itself came from their Creator. They must have feared that in the years ahead, those who would destroy America might subtly deny this truth. So leaving nothing to chance, they were most positive. They took pains to emphasize the fact that the natural law itself depends on God. When they wrote, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the law of nature and of nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. It was in this form, with two pointed references to God, that the Declaration was submitted to Congress. But Congress was not quite satisfied. Although they made many deletions from the final draft and a few other changes in wording, they insisted upon two insertions. In the next to the last sentence, they made it clear that they were appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. And in the very last sentence of the Declaration of Independence, they strengthened their affirmation of our dependence upon God by adding these words: with the firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. In a paper appearing in the Journal of American Medical Association, January 3rd, 1948, quotes Cardinal Bellarmine in 1576, 200 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, as expressing similar thoughts when he wrote, all men are equal, not in wisdom or grace, but in the essence and nature of mankind. Political right is from God and necessarily inherent in the nature of man. It depends upon the consent of the multitude to constitute over itself a king, consul, or other magistrate. This power is indeed from God, but vested in a particular ruler by the council and election of men. This was no new doctrine either to the founding fathers or to the Cardinal Bellarmine. They well know it had to come down through long centuries, that for thousands of years, despite persecutions, defection, and obstacles of every sort, the Jews had to keep alive the sublime concept that man has an eternal destiny, that he derives his rights from his Creator, and that, because of this, he has solemn obligations to his fellow men, in each of whom he should see a child of God. Their view of man's spiritual nature has always been clear-cut. The author of Genesis, writing 12 or 13 centuries before Christ, puts it very specifically, and God created man to his own image, and the Lord God formed man of the slime of the earth, and breathed into his face the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Genesis 1:27 and 2:7. Now, one of the things that we need to look at that, Lord is not a correct translation of that. Yahweh, increasing existence, God is a noun and verb, but, establishing, but Lord is not really a translation. Why can't we just say it, God did not have so to favor us. He could have formed us on the same level as the beasts of the field, yet precisely because he did make us living souls with the gift of understanding and wisdom, and understanding and reason, he left us with an obligation to exercise our God-given rights, but with an equal responsibility to see that these rights are neither ignored or abused. So far, unfortunately, too many of us have both ignored and abused them. A New York Daily, not long ago, revealed its alarm over this apathy and abuse in words that should strike home to each and every one of us. Try this if you will, it stated. Go into any group, the more prosperous and fashionable the better, the test, and speak of the self-evident truth that all men are, humans, are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Say to this group, well, yeah, name one religion that says that, well, you can do what makes you happy. Well, try to be happy in what's right or whatever, Say to this group that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. We venture that you will be startled by the number of people, particularly the younger people, who do not know that you are quoting the Declaration of Independence. And of those who know, a large number will not agree with this philosophy expressed. And of those who agree, this is the most tragic thing. Many will not have the courage to say so. With this situation staring us in the face, is it any wonder, then, that the godless have taken on the job of rewriting American history to fit the doctrines of Karl Marx, and they are trying to do just that. The New York World Telegram on April 20th, 1948, quotes the Moscow radio as saying, "The U.S. Constitution is a fraud," and goes on to give the red version of the classic boxing phrase, "We was robbed." You don't believe that lie. I don't believe it. The mass of the American people don't believe it. But too many of us are lulled into a conviction that the problem will take care of itself. It will not and cannot. The only answer is to have more and more bearers of the truth, which connects to the word Lucifer, but especially in those phases of life, which, for better or worse, fashion the destinies of men, education, government, labor, and communications, newspapers, magazines, books, radio, television, and motion pictures. Put enough people who are fighters for the truth to each of those fields, and the rest will take care of itself. The cure? Bearers of the light? More Christophers. That is the answer, and there is nothing original about it. It is as old as the hills. As soon as there are more people turning on the lights, there are those turning them off. Then the darkness disappears. Some unknown author put it simply, yet so well. Such is the irresistible nature of truth, that all it asks and all it wants is the liberty of appearing. The sun needs no inscription to distinguish it from darkness. Even those who have little or no time for religion are beginning to see that now. Well, it depends on what you mean by religion. They are beginning to realize that the evil forces that have risen up over the world in the last few years to crush them have worked even more furiously to stamp out Christianity, because it alone has the light of truth. It alone is the one universal cause that champions men's dignity. And if you find anything good or true that's not explicitly part of Christianity, that statement falls apart. They are beginning to see the falseness of the subversives claiming to want to protect the people and to relieve oppression, to provide freedom for the laborer. They are beginning to see that these hypocrites, just as Christ himself saw them when he likened them to whited sepulchres, which outwardly appear to men beautiful, but within are full of dead men's bones and of all filthiness. Matthew 23:27. They are beginning to see that all the godless follow one pattern, namely, to deny or ignore the sacredness of the individual so that the state may become supreme. Well, what about those doing it for the corporation? What to do about it? It will avail us nothing merely to mumble incredible and blindly lash out against our enemies. That is like trying to fight against darkness when it would be much more constructive and effective to fight for light. Neither do we think. We are too few to make any real progress in solving the enormous problems now confronting us. Time and again, throughout history, a few have saved the many. If you recall, God himself was willing to spare whole cities if a handful could be found who were filled with the love of God and the love of man. Well, perhaps love wasn't the motion, but if I find in Sodom 50 just within the city, I will spare a whole place for their sake. Genesis 18:26. Nor should we think that to be Christ-bearers we have to destroy. Emphasis should be on saving. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Matthew 5:17. So the Christian antinomianism is not supported by what the Bible claims of Jesus. The words of Pope St. Gregory in 597 of the Common Era illustrates this point with all the keen insight of one who saw clearly the way salvation was to be shared with all mankind. Writing to St. Augustine of Canterbury and instructing him how he was to approach the problem of Christianizing England, Gregory advised him to transform so-called heathen temples into Christian churches rather than destroy them, and whenever possible to adapt so-called heathen practices to the celebration of Christian festivals. 4. To declare Gregory, he who would ascend a height must mount not up by leaps, but step by step. Now, I would strongly discourage such hate speech as saying someone's pagan or heathen just because they're not Christian. To bring Christ into the world, we must also ascend not by leaps, but step by step. Obviously, we don't have to possess all the saintly virtues to achieve that purpose. To refer again to the godless, the Reds don't ascend or try to ascend by leaps. They don't use only